Okay, here we have Bitcoin. Starting off with a lower term time frame, fallen up on the last few days of analysis. It's been more or less the same thing, of which Bitcoin coming back down to the 382 Fibonacci retracement right here at 38,500 after the rejection at the 0.5. And we actually did see a slight closure below there, which was our validation for a move down to the blue box territory right here, which I do think can come maybe a little bit lower towards 37 even, but ultimately a bounce area nonetheless. If you are on the lower term timeframes, the analysis is more or less unchanged here. Essentially, as long as Bitcoin's below $40,000, not anything, massively new to be speaking about, even for a short or medium term time frame. However, above there, I do still look for the same thing, up to about 41,200 to 41,500 as my brain breaks. But ultimately, right now, that's not too relevant as Bitcoin does play out the move a little bit slightly lower. So let's now go into our other lower term time frame momentum oscillators and see, if this one is going to break here. Is this a likely break? As I would be looking at $37,000 as a major pivot on price action, not just for a 4-hour time frame like this, but actually most importantly a daily, as this does have major implications more long term. If Bitcoin does close below the $37,000 region, I do look at that as a major indication that we're going to see much lower. That is kind of the major bouncing point, the major pivot on price action that I look for the downside of right now. Just like $44,500 to the upside is a major pivot to the upside. Now, obviously, that's just not too relevant for current price action because we're about $6,000 away from that, which is quite the stretch right here. So with that in mind, let's go down here into the lower term time frame stochastic momentum and see if things are starting to turn around Bitcoin. As always, on a Monday, I will be using CME for this analysis. We'll start off with the short term time frames right here, of which we do see 4-hour stochastic momentum is going to be pointed to the upside as long as Bitcoin's closing above 38,150. Currently, we have about 3 hours, 45 minutes, and 21 seconds left to go until closure. What's interesting to me is that on today's Monday, contrary to most Mondays, we actually do see that CME and spot price action are in the same posturing here. And what is interesting about this is that we actually do have a nice little trend line coming in from the last few lows going into the 5th of March. So were these major lows? Not necessarily major lows, but did precipitate some decent-ish bounces, if you will. And we will see that once again cross the upside and reject the bearish control zone with any sort of a closure on the next one at above 38,150. Let's say that's coming in on spot at an hour and 34 minutes and 45 seconds to be exact. What's also very interesting about this is that this is within the context of very low volatility. So if we do see volatility expansion, specifically, I really want to see this on BBWP just because the BBWP I think is a little bit more obvious right here. As we do see it not just come down all the way to about 0 percentile, but if we do see it maintain a positive slope and also remain above the moving average on this, I'd be looking at that next indication, that next sort of shift in momentum as very likely, going to play out a short-term move to the upside, to the top side of the short-term time frame resistance in this case, of which we're going to be looking at that. In this case, that's in your mid $39,000 region. So if that closure is maintained, that'd be good for the short-term timeframes. But again, short-term timeframes, not the same thing, a short-term timeframe bounce, not the same thing as a short-term timeframe reversal. That conversation is null and void. Especially as long as Bitcoin's below $40,000. And I'd even go as far as saying that in the context of our current price action, it's better to err on the side of conservativeness, of cautiousness, of which I'd say, that really puts us right around about 42,500, the high of last week, essentially, on that failed rally attempt. So going back on over here, I do want to start to match this up with the other lower term timeframes, see if there's anything, any rhyme or reason on the lower term timeframes, of which we do see 3-hour is once again loading, of which, yes, it will turn back up. It will officially cross the upside above about 38,500, which we are currently about $100 above right now. Buy hourly also freshly up above 38,230, and hourly should also be up as well, I believe. Yes, indeed it is, above 38,000 bucks. So all kind of building upon the lower term timeframes. So what does it essentially make me consider? Very likely a bounce, a little bit more of a short-term continuation of that bounce into intraday here, but ultimately, these are very small margins. When we go over into the medium and higher term timeframes, well, relative to those lower term timeframes, the picture becomes a little bit more nasty. I would say we do see 12-hour stochastic momentum is still playing out a downside move here. But here's the thing: this is downside momentum below 40,700 within the context of declining volatility, right? So we're seeing a contraction phase alongside, alongside downside momentum. So I'm looking at this as a corrective move. So short-term timeframes very likely continue the bounce. Medium-term timeframes, are probably are generally within a corrective move here, which in this case probably does hold the current low. I don't think that Bitcoin's breaking down today, for example, even if you are very, very bearish. Going over here to the daily, we do see that daily stochastic momentum will actually shift on to the upside for the first time basically since late February, with any sort of a closure above 38,200. So I do think that bounce could bleed into the higher term timeframes, but again, that's going to be mediated very specifically by the $40,000 level. Until then, I'll just be looking for a short-term, upside move, maybe somewhere around about 39.5. Kind of the same thing as last week, right? Where we had that same goddamn trade like 3, 4, or maybe even 5 days in a row. It was kind of like becoming a guilty pleasure. But in this case, very likely a short-term continuation of the bounce. Does the bounce get above $40,000 or not? That is the real question. If it does, I do extend targets decently, I suppose, at least another $1,000 to $1,500 up around the 618 Fibonacci retracement right here. And then that's kind of the big one for me as far as judging if this reversal has any power to it. Above there, I do look for a full-on move back up to the top side of the range. That's $44,500. And that very likely does set up for a major event later this month. So the big signal that I'm kind of awaiting upon is the 5-day right here. And this is what I'm going to be placing a lot of the weight of my analysis on going forwards for especially the midpoint of this week, and then very likely looking for resolution at the end of this month. And that would be the 5-day BBWP, of which we do see it coming down to historically very low levels right here. I'm going to bring out the same chart as yesterday because I do think that is very relevant. And we have seen this same area hit 1, 2, 3, 4, well, technically 5, but 4 prior times in the past year here. And where is my damn thing? There we go. There's the chart that we were working off of. And all of these regions that were hit on very low volatility did produce a rather big move, both the upside and the downside. So these same regions are all represented by the green vertical bars. So I'm going to get rid of this for right now. And of course, volatility is direction neutral, right? So in this case, we see the first move playing down about 50%. The next move was an upside move, obviously. And from that area to the next major high, before a little bit of a short-term correction, was about a 44% move. So these are rather comparable to each other. Then we have the same one over here going to the upside, about 46% move to the upside. And then of course, this one to the downside, of which we played out about a 42-ish% move. So these are very similar to each other. And guess what? We've once again hit these same regions right here on 5-day BBWP. Thus far, still holding the lows. So I would say that until we do get until we get like a major bias on the resolution of this, which essentially just boils down to it in the way that I look at things, above 44.5 good or below $37,000 bad. I mean, this is within the the context of like bull goggles, I guess. Realistically shouldn't really care, but ultimately, what we can do to kind of get a bit more of a bias on the resolution of that likely, 40 to 50% style move, I'd be going over here to my 5-day stochastic momentum oscillator and judge that within the context of those past moves. So let me bring it out right here. Where was the chart that I was working off of yesterday? I think it was this one, right? Yeah, it was this one right here. So what I've done on this chart is I've actually highlighted with the vertical green bars all of those same areas on the 5-day BBWP. And then what you'll notice throughout these areas is that the 5-day stochastic momentum has actually gotten the move perfectly in the past, basically meaning that when we see that the very low BBWP is met by, in this case, in May, a 5-day stochastic downside move and also losing the bullish control zone right here, well, that was obviously, a big bad move to the downside, obviously, right? Same thing to the upside in that next iteration off of July bear trap, right? We did see it not just cross the upside, but also work its way out of the bearish control zone right here. Same thing in October where the stochastic momentum was holding within the bullish control zone and turning up at the same time. That was your run from basically 40,000 to 65,000 or 69,000. Great number right there. And then same thing to the downside more recently in December when it officially lost the bullish control zone and was heading down at the same time. The reason why this is relevant and the reason why I'm putting a lot of weight on this is the reason why I'm putting a lot of weight on this is because it's what you just saw. But the reason why this is relevant and why I think it's something to really be keeping an eye on is that the next 5-day closure is coming in 2 days. So that would be Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And what do we see right here? Or is it going to be 8 p.m. now because daylight savings time? Well, whatever it is, the daily closure for Wednesday, essentially. If we do see the 5-day stochastic momentum once again turn to the upside, which will be had with any sort of a closure above 38,350. This would not only be turning up to the upside yet again, but it would also be rejecting or accepting getting out of the bearish control zone, most importantly, on very, very low volatility. So that would be a really good indication that Bitcoin likely does take the upside resolution. And if that does happen, not only would, short-term targets up to $44,500 to $45,000 be relevant, but above there, that's where Bitcoin really starts to initiate some more impressive targets, more long-term, of which one we would have, let me just see if I have it on this chart right here. One, we would have an ascending triangle, a reaccumulation formation, which does have a technical target upon validation all the way up to about $55,000 to $56,000, and it would naturally confirm a higher low on the weekly right here, and also naturally confirm a couple drives of hidden bullish evidence come off the lows right here. And by the way, this would also be a rejection of the RSI off of the bearish control zone as well, which would just be, further confluencing the 5-day stochastic momentum. But ultimately, that would have a technical target into the basically, low $50,000 territory as well. And if that were to happen, it would bleed on into the monthly as well, of which the monthly would also have hidden bullish evidence. Right now, I do not consider this relevant because I see it a lot on Twitter is the reason why I'm kind of calling it out right now. But the problem is until you actually do confirm this as a local low, you cannot compare this low with this price action right here because they're not of the same, accord. Whenever you're talking about divergence, it must be low versus low or high versus high. There is no in between. There is no ever conversation to be had against that. That is the way that it is, it is designed. And the RSI just, as understanding the actual fucking indicator itself only works off of closures to begin with. So when you are front running a closure, in this case, which I would be doing actually, then I need to, it needs to be very, very, strong, or have to be very confident in it. Yes, at which case, if Bitcoin were to trade back above basically last month's high or this month's high, about that $45,000 region, yeah, I'd say that probably does it. And you'd have hidden bullish evidence on monthly RSI, and that wouldn't just have targets up to 56-ish thousand. That'd very likely be testing around $60,000 again, ultimately. So that's kind of what's at stake for the Bulaws. Obviously, the Bears, we've been going over the bearish case a million goddamn times over here. The biggest one for me is, of course, the monthly chart right here, of which boils down to this monthly MACD crossing the downside. Every time that's actually happened, it's always been the same result. In fact, coming down to the green 55 exponential moving average. Now, I like to mediate that with a couple of other indicators for added timing of that, of which we have the PMAR getting below the moving average. And then most importantly for timing is Bitcoin losing that white 20 simple on the monthly. And that typically does precipitate the next major move to the downside, which does, historically speaking, come all the way down to the green 55. We have 3 iterations of this in the past, not a whole hell of a lot, but 3 times does make a trend. So it's just good enough as far as I look at things. And in this case right here, where's the 55 on the monthly? That's just below $24,000. So I still think that that's, worst case scenario to the downside. I forgot to go over this as well. My bad on this one, but basically we should have measured out what would about a 45% move to the upside or downside from our current area right here look like, just so that we can add some confluence onto these targets. But basically 45% to the upside, oh, guess what? That's $56,000, which was the technical target on an upside resolution. To the downside, from this area would be actually all the way down at around, $21-ish, about $22,000. Obviously very, very close to the 55 right here. I do think that we could, if the downside resolution does happen, I'm looking for a wick down around there and then probably close around the 55 and spend some time, oscillating around there. But ultimately, the earliest that I'd front run an upside signal on that, again, above $44,500. The downside, again, below about $37,000 on a daily closure. I do think that the downside does start to gain a lot more traction. And while there will be bounces along the way, maybe even some very big bounces along the way, ultimately I'd be looking for, first move down somewhere around 34.5, probably bounce there. Bounce probably fails, depending upon how high it gets, I imagine. Then comes down to the macro cycle, or sorry, not the macro cycle, but the macro range range area, which is of course this area right here between about 29.5 and 30,005, and then very likely another big bounce right there, and then probably the big bad dooms drop down to that final target if that is going to be the way to be looking for. But to add maybe a little bit onto this, I do want to bring you over here to Dixie, of course the dollar index. Again, this is the dollar's value relative to a basket of other fiat currencies, although while that's not a direct relationship to asset prices, it does seem to have a decent enough correlation to where I want to be aware of it. And I'm massively bullish on all higher term timeframes for this, as we have been basically since the major reversal was confirmed back here in ending Q3 of 2021. We're starting to hit our first macro targets around the $100 region, of which we got up all the way to 99.4 just yet. And ultimately, I am looking for a short-term pullback relatively soon, but short-term pullback, again, not the same thing as a macro reversal here. I am looking for this one to continue upwards and onwards, probably around end of year, maybe into 2023 as well. This is a long-term chart, obviously, and that would be not the most bullish for Bitcoin, I imagine, or at least historically speaking. Also looking at traditional markets here as well. Bad, maybe a bit of a short-term bounce as markets open up, but ultimately, just like Bitcoin below $45,000, it's hard to be, it's hard to look at that as like a major resolution or doing anything of particular interest. This one below, especially $14,000, I'd say the same thing essentially. So, short-term bounces can come up very easily to like 13.5, 13.6, but not the best right there, not the best. So ultimately, I do remain a little bit cautious here, obviously. Anyways, going back on over here and referencing some of the some of the data on the Crown Trade application, should let you know, of course, for the people watching this video a little bit later, we got our 4-year anniversary sale going on right now. And then also we do have the global open interest coming down somewhat to those historically very relevant regions, of which I've kind of postulated that at around 10 billion. We're on the hourly data feed, we're about 10.68. On the daily, we're about 10.55. But ultimately, we have seen that region kind of produce a lot of bounces actually in the past 3-4 months now. So I have set an alert right there. We haven't gotten down exactly there just yet, but if we do start to come down between about 10 and 9, I do look at that coinciding with one of those major areas on price action as likely a bit of a bounce region. What do we see on funding rates? Slightly negative. Again, really grasping at straws here, but yeah, on the hourly data feed, it is negative 0.01%. So it has been consistently negative over the past, I'd say, week or so. But ultimately, these are very small numbers, and you do expect it to be negative during general downtrends, obviously. So, I don't really feel comfortable or confident saying that, hey, that's immediately going to mean that Bitcoin bounces up to the fucking moon and beyond. No, obviously not. But for right now, Bitcoin more or less same thing on the short-term timeframes, and the higher-term timeframes starting to really formulate some of those more long-term signals. So for myself, and I imagine a lot of other people out there as well, the real skill or the real trick right now is kind of figure out the earliest point at which I would be front-running those major signals to play out that next 40 to 50% move, of which I think I've made my opinion on this rather clear. And for the most part, I mean, I'm just trading short-term timeframes anyway, so I actually don't really care, to be honest with you. But as far as, YouTube analysis goes, and ego, right? And ego, that is something that I do want to be a little bit more, aware of right now. Anyways, I think that's it for Bitcoin. I think that's it for Bitcoin. Hopefully that was helpful. And there you go, sirs and zers.